Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start the session now. Many thanks for coming along to this, one of the final sessions of the day, looking to the long-term funding transport infrastructure. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm with Reuters in London. We've got about an hour and a half. The plan is for me to run about 45, 50 minutes up here with the panel, and then I'll throw it out to you for Q&A. A few brief words on the context to get us going. We're all well aware of how critical today's infrastructure investment decisions are for tomorrow. Transport authorities face a tough challenge in ensuring those decisions match citizens' expectations about travel and meet emerging new trends. Put simply, how to invest in a savvy and sensible way now, given the huge uncertainty about the scale and the scope of demand. As it says in the briefing paper, it isn't just a question of how much infrastructure to provide, but also what kind. A delicate balancing act, it seems, between introducing next-generation projects, high-speed rail, hydrogen distribution, to mention a couple, and more traditional projects. What scale of investment is needed for different types of infrastructure, and what new forms of funding can help meet those requirements? And finally, given the limited resources to spend on transport systems, how much should go to fixing and maintaining what is already there versus putting money into new infrastructure and new types of infrastructure? So plenty for us to chew on this afternoon. As I said, we'll throw it out to you, the audience, to get your questions in a while. Our panel this afternoon draws on a wide range of expertise and specific insights, so we'll really try and make the most of that this afternoon. Menyong Weng, Vice Minister at the Chinese Ministry of Transport, at the end here. Next to him is Shailen Bhatt, Cabinet Secretary, Delaware Department of Transportation. On my left, Chris Borroni-Bird, Vice President, Strategic Development, Qualcomm Technologies. Lida Vida Ongering, I think I said that correctly, Director General, almost? Okay. Lida Vida Ongering, Director General for Mobility and Transport, Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment in the Netherlands. And finally, Jon Gunnar Pedersen, Director and Founding Partner, Arctic Securities in Norway. My thanks to all of you for joining us. Charlene, let me start with you. And it's an opening question, and this will allow, hopefully, you all to lay out your stand. What are your priorities now? What are your main challenges? And I'm going to throw this in there as well. What worries you most now about the space that you're operating in?
So there's a number of issues, and before I became the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, I was at the Federal Highway Administration in the U.S. So I have a mix of the national and state perspective. And I think that the one thing that is constant right now for us is change. So in terms of what are our priorities, we're trying to change the focus away from building new roads to maintaining what we have in a state of good repair. State of good repair, asset management, these are things that aren't necessarily as exciting or as glamorous as building new roads, but it's something that's very important. And what we've talked about both at the national and state level is, what is needed to maintain a state of good repair. And so we are right now developing, we've identified 6 asset classes, roads, bridges, tunnels, drainage systems, to say what dollar figure do we need every year to maintain a state of good repair on those assets before we go out and build anything new. And the change is not just in our focus, the change is in technology. Technology is changing for us, and so cars are becoming much more fuel efficient, which has impacts for our funding because it's tied to the gas tax. So as people buy less fuel is available for us. We have changing demographics. Young people in the United States over the last 10 years have dropped significantly in terms of their VMT, the vehicle miles traveled. They're using options such as public transit and other options. They'd rather have a phone than a car in some cases. We've got changing demographics. We've got baby boomers who are getting older who don't want to drive as much. The technologies are changing as well. If 20 years from now we have cars that are driving themselves that are 2 inches off the bumper of the one in front, they won't need as much space, so maybe the roads we need are going to be different. So it's a lot of change. There's a lot of uncertainty. And the thing that keeps me up at night well, it doesn't keep me up at night, but it does worry me, is the fact that are we building today and are we locking ourselves in as we go forward to a transportation pattern that may have changed or will be changed by upcoming trends?
And how comfortable do you feel that what you are doing today and the amount of money you're spending on that, how comfortable do you feel that you are right now making the right decisions?
I think we're doing the best that we can.
What does that mean?
In the sense that we have limited resources. So we have in transportation, you have unlimited wants and needs. Everybody wants a new road, wants an interchange, wants a new traffic light, wants. I sit on the Northeast Corridor Commission. We're trying to get new rail investments between Washington and Boston for high-speed rail and freight certainty. And so there's unlimited wants, but limited ways to pay for those wants. And that's the challenge. So when I say we're doing the best we can, we're taking limited resources and applying it to an unlimited demand. And so you have to make choices. And so when I say we're doing the best we can, we're trying to prioritize the things that we want to invest in and say, this is the return. This is your the return on investment for this investment. And then saying, now you, the public, in a very transparent way, we turn to them and say, are you comfortable with this? And that's the process that we're going through.
And of course, and we'll come on to this, but you're working within a federal context as well, and different strategies at the federal level. It'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about that later. Vice Minister, same question to you. There's a huge infrastructure build out in China right now. What long-term revenue requirements are you thinking about now?
Thank you, moderator. China has a different situation from the U.S. As you know that China is now ongoing a very rapid economic growth, but generally speaking, we're still a developing country. I like to say that 30 years ago, we have a very limited coverage of road network, but up to 2012, we have about 4.24 million kilometers of road coverage. And at that time, the priority we given is to form a comprehensive framework network of roads. And we have focused our attention on the establishment of a main framework of road network. As time goes by, we begin to realize that it is not sufficient to establish this main framework. We should also help to improve the local road network. The U.S. have mentioned how to improve the efficiency of the funding, and what is the role that the government should play in funding for transport infrastructure. And I would like to say that in the past, the government is playing a dominant role in the funding. And in the early 1980s, we have imposed some special funds for the improvement of transport infrastructure, and also have a policy to promote the rapid development of China's transport infrastructure. This policy boosted the rapid development of Chinese highway network. That is the main point I would like to make. And we should be also aware that China is now facing a lot of difficulties. And in terms of the nature of non-profit of infrastructure, I think the government should establish a special fund for the transport infrastructure construction so that we can avoid to bring a lot of burden to the public. Thank you.
Follow up on that. Is that something that is likely to happen anytime soon?
Okay. Please.
My question is that fund and the government involvement and greater government involvement, is that likely to happen anytime soon?
Yes, I have to say that this is very possible to happen in the future. As I've mentioned that we have not complete the network of the transport infrastructure, and I think the dominant role of the government is going to be weakened with the improvement of the construction of infrastructure. Thank you.
Many thanks. Leader Vida, let me put a similar starting question to you in terms of what your priorities and challenges are now. This cooperation theme is a very strong one in Holland. Talk to us about that as well and how that fits into this.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I have to say that the situation in our country is very different from the situation in China and the United States. If we compare the size of our countries, yes, we lose. We're just a tiny little country, especially in compare to the US and China. But I think we also have some challenges that are the same. Our key task is to keep our countries accessible, and we have to keep it accessible with budget restraints, and that is the big challenge, how we organize this. And this is where we have to be creative, looking for a new, innovative way to open alternative sources of funding infrastructure. And in the Netherlands, we try to tackle this with a three-way approach, and I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that. First of all, we have an adaptable long-term investment program that is based on a share and an integrated vision. Secondly, we're making better use of existing infrastructure. And third, we use several forms of public-private partnership. Let me briefly give you a few examples of this three-way approach. The first way is to have an adaptable long-term investment program based on an integrated vision. We recently came up with a long-term policy strategy that brings spatial planning, infrastructure, and mobility together. So we bring it in combination and then make our decisions. And what we did on the financial side is we made a separate investment fund. So there's a wall between the general expenditures from the government and the infrastructure investments. So there's no annual cost cuttings there. So we have a horizon in investment planning for 2030. So that's a big achievement that we can organize it that way. And it means that we are focusing our new investments around concrete goals. For instance, our largest urban areas. And that means our main ports in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, the harbor, and also an area south in our country, Eindhoven, which is one of the European leading brain ports. And we select this project in good consultation with the regional governments. And for instance, my ministry finances a new railway terminal at Amsterdam South, near the World Trade Center. And the Amsterdam City region connects the metro and the tram links, and the private sector develops new offices in that area. So that's a good example of a combined strategy there. The second way of the approach is making better use of existing infrastructure. In our program there, we are using the current infrastructure before building new ones. And the aim is to reduce the congestion about 20% in a major bottlenecks we have. And the idea is to look for small-scale solutions at local level that involves working closely with regional authorities and businesses. For instance, we are encouraging people to travel outside the rush hour, by giving them a small financial incentive. Around 30,000 persons are now taking part in these regional schemes, and this will cush rush hour peaks by them by 35 to 50%. And we are also encouraging employers to make smart agreements with employees, for example, by introducing flexible working hours. This way, in the Rotterdam area, we have eliminated the need to widen a bridge and build new roads. The third way of this approach is the innovative forms of public-private partnership. Joint cooperation of industry, universities and government. And we have our top sector on logistics, and it's one of the main economic sectors in the Netherlands we want to strengthen. And we came up with them with a joint program and funding. And as a result of this, we have identified a selected number of logistical trunk routes in our country where road, rail and water runs parallel. And that allows the industry to focus their multimodal hubs development along these roads and give sustainable transport a lift focus while diminishing the burden of freight traffics in our other routes. So these are some of the examples how we try to work very close together in our country with several parties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Jon Gunnar Pedersen, there were three pieces that I wanted to touch on: the amount of infrastructure, the type of infrastructure needed, and then the revenue mechanisms. Of course, all of this carries risk, and it was a word you used just before we started. And the question is, who covers that risk? I guess this is one of the main issues everyone is grappling with right now.
I would think so, yes. And I represent the private sector, but of course, as a Norwegian taxpayer, I also, to the 50% of me, also represents the government side. And while we have infrastructure issues and a demand for infrastructure that far exceeds our ability to produce it as any other country, we also invest in the infrastructure of other countries. And that is a continuous process whereby we try to assess future risk. In many ways, it's all about future risks, the transportation infrastructure. There are legal risks, the financial and legal parameters of any deal. There's political risk. There's timing risk, when do the positive cash flows emerge? There's the project risk, who pays for the cost overruns? There's the revenue risk, and how secure are the cash flows when they come? There's the substitution risk, if there's a new road, do motorists use it or do they drive the old road? And in the long term then, there's this technology risk. And one of the things we're trying to do, both in the private and the government sector, is to place money long term. We have to invest not just with a 20-year perspective, but perhaps with a 40, 60, 100-year perspective when we place money. And to anyone who visited the BMW car plant recently, or who looked at some of the exhibits here, it's easy to see that the transportation infrastructure that we're going to need 40 to 50 years from now is going to look very different, since the cars are going to look very different, since people are going to move about in different ways than they do. And in this situation, we have to try to invest our money in parts of infrastructure that we know are not going to be there or are not going to be valuable to the extent and in the fashion they are now. And that is a very important challenge to the entire financial community. And it's in periods of change and shift in those patterns that the financial community will be uncertain as to how this technological risk is going to play out. And if they're uncertain, they will pull back from it. I think that the limiting factor may not be technology, it's really space. Planning processes in most countries illustrate that as the countries fill up with wealthier, more sophisticated, legally much better protected individuals, then the use of space will be a defining factor in the valuation of infrastructure. And the value of owning an already established grid, which can be put to alternate uses, is perhaps a key to unlocking new financing as well. And I think that the innovation in the use of alternate use of existing infrastructure is going to be a driving force also in the funding, both of the upkeep of existing infrastructure and in the new patterns of infrastructure that we have to lay on top of this.
Okay, many thanks. And we'll come back to this, this space premium in just a while. Let me finish up with you, Chris. You're the technology part, I guess, of this panel. And one of the questions is finding the right funding balance between traditional and next generation technology-related infrastructure. How much does that play into what you're doing now, what Qualcomm are doing, and the partnerships you're creating?
Well, thank you. First of all, maybe I should explain a little bit, because many of you may not know Qualcomm, but Qualcomm is short for Quality Communications. It's about 25 years old. We're in pretty much everybody's cell phone, the connectivity that provides the 3G, 4G, LTE connectivity, and increasingly the processor, the CPU inside the smartphone is Qualcomm technology. So we're a wireless communications and wireless technology company, and looking to leverage those same technology capabilities into automotive and transportation in general. We're a $20 billion company, roughly, growing about 20% per year, and based in San Diego. So in terms of the mobility technologies that we're developing, we are very much working on dedicated short-range communications, which will provide vehicle-to-vehicle communications. Many of you may have heard of this. It's a way to improve the efficiency of the traffic, as well as reducing accidents between vehicles. We're also looking at vehicle-to-pedestrian and vehicle-to-cyclist communications. And these technologies, we think, when broadly deployed, will help significantly to improve quality of life in city centers, because we don't see personal mobility using passenger vehicles disappearing. There's definitely a role for walking and cycling and public transport, but there will also be a role for the foreseeable future in terms of motorized, weather-protected vehicles, because they provide a certain benefits that the other modes of transport don't provide. But we can do it in a much more sustainable manner through better traffic management, improved safety, and then from an energy and environmental perspective, we're developing wireless charging for electric vehicles, so that you could park a car, an electric car, over a pad at home in your garage, or perhaps in a public parking space, or longer term, maybe in the road itself, and have charging of the vehicle automatically. And that promises to reduce the size of the battery, because you wouldn't be carrying this large battery around with you all the time. You'd be picking it up on the fly, a little bit like Wi-Fi. So we think that these technologies, wireless communications and wireless charging, are going to be necessary for personal mobility to be sustainable, particularly in urban areas in the future. But one of the challenges we see is finding an appropriate funding mechanism and novel approaches to funding these technologies, because they provide significant sustainable benefits. But the quantifying that in terms of economics is challenging. But perhaps if you could find a way to link emissions coming out of vehicles with air pollution, and then linking air pollution to healthcare costs in a sort of a very local manner, because, you know, all politics is local. If you can find a way to link those together, people might be willing to pay more for cleaner vehicles.
Okay, Chris, many thanks. Shannon, I want to come back on that point to you and ask you, and you touched on it briefly, but how great a role technology, which is clearly changing consumer travel habits, how great a role that is having on your planning and your funding?
So I'll give you a couple of examples with projects. In Delaware right now, we're contemplating building an extension of a highway to help congestion issues, both locally and regionally, along the east coast of the United States. And the cost of this road is about nearly $500 million. And in order to finance it, it's going to be a toll road that we're going to say we're going to sell 40-year bonds, and we have to project traffic over 40 years to say to the funders that, or the investors, that, you know, here's what we think the traffic is going to be. And just the sheer uncertainty of being able to say now, right, that 20 years from now, if some of this technology comes to pass, well, it's hard for me to say that the traffic is going to be there. And I think that gets back to some of the risk that is associated out there, and that's uncertainty for the project. And certainly the challenge for us is then, okay, well, if your projections are wrong, who covers the bill? Another issue with regards to this.
Where are you going on that challenge?
Well, what we have in Delaware is what's known as a transportation trust fund. It is a dedicated fund of money, so our tolls, our gas tax, state gas tax, and then all of our motor vehicle fees when you register your vehicles, all of that goes into a separate pool of money, which we call the Transportation Trust Fund. And what our expectation will be is that as we're working with the federal government to help us fund this, and then also going to the private markets, is that people are going to ask that we put that up as a backstop potentially, so to help mitigate some of that risk. At a larger level, we're looking to develop. We have the Northeast Corridor, which connects the cities of Washington D.C. and New York. And Boston, going through New York City on the way. And this is a piece of infrastructure that was built. In some cases, we have tunnels that were built in the time of Lincoln, so 1865, that you can only run a train through at 30 miles an hour. You have bridges that are 100 years old that have worked very well for 100 years, but it's a 100-year-old bridge. The problem is that, and then you just have capacity issues. So New York City, to get in onto the island of Manhattan, they need a new tunnel, because it's not just the passenger side; it's the freight as well that is creating some issues. That is that one tunnel by itself is $1 billion. So the entire project is going to be tens of, if not $100 billion. And that gets back to the role of the federal government. Is that it's in a perfect world without politics, you would just say, this is the need, here's the benefit, let's go and fund it. And here are all the people who use transit and will benefit. Here's all the freight benefits. Here are all the cars, the trips that will come off of the road. But we don't live in that world. Politics is a huge implication. And so as you're trying to build out these projects that are going to take 30 or 40 years, you've got great funding uncertainty just from the current standpoint, and then great political uncertainty that also comes in, and that just creates a lot of issues for us.
Sure. Vice Minister, I'd like to put a similar question to you. What sort of visibility do you have in China regarding the type of infrastructure needed over the next 50 years or so?
Up to now, we have basically finished the planning of the National Road Program, and it is due to 2030 or 2035, based on the Chinese prediction as well as the demand of people's traveling. And just as I mentioned, that we are going to build a 6 million kilometer long road, and among which 130,000 kilometers are expressive ways. This is just a program. However, the society development is dynamic, and the social system is also dynamic. There are many possibilities that the length of the total road may exceed the planned length. And just now I have listened and heard the comments from the Qualcomm technologies and other panelists that I'm very, they provide very thoughtful ideas for me. In China, we have a very large population, but we have very limited resources. The way of infrastructure expansion is not suitable to China's development. It is also not a sustainable or green mode of development. Therefore, we focus on the innovative ways, for example, the green technology, green energy, as well as the high-tech technologies. We have granted large resources from the government to encourage the scientific research in this regard. Just now, some experts have mentioned the wireless charging. Many companies in China are experimenting or trying to do this, and the Chinese government are encouraging them to do so. From the perspective of investment, we encourage the strategic investment and to promote the development of transport. Many investors are reluctant to invest. The reason for this may be that many technologies are not, many problems in the technology are not resolved, so they are reluctant, they are hesitant to invest in this area. Therefore, we have to do a lot of more in the high technology research.
Back on something.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, obviously China and the U.S. are in two very different places. When the minister talks about building millions of kilometers of roads, that's obviously not, that's something that we've already done earlier. And so now we're looking at different things. But we have the same issue in that chances are when they're done building millions of kilometers of road, we'll still have the same issue in both countries of congestion. And I think that is where we're going to end up relying on things like technology. But what we find in the U.S., and it was true here in Germany, as I was going back to the hotel yesterday, I asked the driver, the traffic seems bad. Is it always like this? And he said, no, it's just the rush hour. And so it's true in Germany. I'm sure it'll be true in the other countries, that our transportation system, for the most part, is great 18 of 24 hours of the day. And so then the question then becomes, are you ever going to build it to the point where it's you never have congestion? And I don't think that is something that we could ever find the funding to do. And that's why we have to use things like technology to maximize the utility of the existing infrastructure so that we're not always talking about just more and wider roads all the time.
Right. It's just the rush hour during the International Transport Forum.
That's right.
Literally.
Yeah, if we look at the network in the Netherlands, to say it's roughly our road network and our railway network, well, we don't have to build great new stretches like it is in China, so that's a big difference. So then it comes indeed to new technologies and how you will use them, and I will mention two examples. I think it's very important that we have new technology that gives us on-time, real-time information about how to travel. And that should solve the problem of the rush hour traffic jams. If you have in-time, in-place information, then you can make a decision before jumping into your car. Oh, is this a good idea to do this, or should I maybe go to the train station and pick a train and then find my way back home? So I believe this new development on technical information we all have this iPhone in our pocket, will really help us to make other solutions about the way I transport, and will it also make more easier to transform from wheel to rail to bus to other forms of transport. That's one example. The second one is of the intelligent technical systems, ITS, which will really help us to improve our traffic management. We have an example in the same region in the Brainport, as I mentioned before, where we have now a stretch where we can test car-to-car information, so the driver is not needed anymore. The car will organize that there's a fast distance between one car and the other, and that gives the possibility to use far more cars in the same stretch of road. So the development of all these systems will help us a great deal to organize more traffic.
Chris, yeah, I'll come to you in just a sec, Chris, but I have a question on the back of that, because we, again, with a layperson's hat on here, we all see the need for the technology, that it's required, but what about finding, and it comes back to funding here, what about finding the right balance, funding balance, between the next generation technology for infrastructure and the traditional? That is clearly a big part of the process here.
It is, and if this has finally good market solutions, then the market will jump into it. So that's the discussion we have always with our private sector.
Right.
But there's a phase that goes in advance of this, the development phase, where the private sector also have to make huge cost and to invest, and they're not sure if they have the return on investment. And well, we have discussions there how to organize this.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, as we look at the future of transport, personal transport on the roads, I think one of the things that may happen in the next 20 years or so is the development of vehicles that can drive autonomously. And that could be a very significant change in terms of travel, because now you have a situation where people aren't so stressed out about wasting time being stuck in traffic. They may not be stuck in traffic so much, but even if they are, they're free to be productive. So the whole personal aspects of congestion and the stress associated with it could be different, as well as land use patterns. One of the reasons people live close to a city is because if they live far away from the city, they have to travel a long distance, and it takes a lot of time. Whereas if the vehicle drives autonomously, it could have a significant impact on land use. So there could be a lot of unintended consequences from autonomous vehicles in the future. But whatever that happens, they still need to be extremely clean, and that's why we believe in the future of electric vehicles energized by renewable sources of electricity, which can be enabled with dynamic charging of vehicles on the road. Because now you have a huge reservoir of energy storage that can be used for capturing renewable energies, which are intermittent.
All right. John Garang, I know you wanted to say something on this, and I'd be interested to hear your views on this funding balance as well, and the discussions you've had on that.
Well, I think that whereas we've seen that there are certain issues regarding sovereign nations' ability to gather debt, still gathering debt and revenue and organizing finances is something governments are quite good at. And in most countries, the sovereign is the one who can raise debt at the lowest price. The market's pretty smart, but money has no brain. And whereas the market and private finance is good at financing bread and butter technologies and stable cash flows, like 20 of the first 40 years that you're going to build your highways, or the next 10 to 15 years down the road of electric cars. Currently, they're not good at projecting the 40-year future, nor are they good at the introduction of new technologies. And in some of these instances, there is a catch-22. Until you have plenty of electric cars, you won't get many commercial loading docks or loading stations or charging stations put up. And until you have a sufficient number of charge stations, not enough people will be able to buy electric cars. And that's a technology gap which the market's not very good at bridging. And I think that there are plenty of issues, or plenty of areas where the market can solve many problems which are currently stretching government finances. But there are clearly other areas where government financing is a much smarter financial approach than what the market can support.
So governments have got their priorities wrong. What other areas are you talking about?
Well, one area is simply the financing of existing infrastructure. Because I'm fascinated, as any citizen would be, I think, by a government's ability to find a value and tax it. And wherever you create a value, you're also creating a tax basis. For instance, in building infrastructure, if you do convert a previous piece of infrastructure to another piece of infrastructure, which can increase the land values, clearly value has been created. And if value has been created, you have also created an income base which you could generate money from. It could be the tax on land, or it could be the taxes paid by the new people who are moving into that area. So the government has an ability to think financing in ways others do.
And this is the space premium that you were talking about?
Well, it's the space premium, but it's also an area where I'd be very careful in saying how other countries should adjust themselves. There are historical differences between what you're used to and what you're not used to. A Norwegian parliamentarian said that it's impressive how much tax people can pay once they get used to it. And there are historical differences in some countries which limit, for instance, the use of road taxes. And I respect that in some areas, in some countries, that can be difficult. In other countries, people are more open to innovative government revenue enhancement. And there are, wherever there's value created, there's also a tax to be fitted.
Shelin, I want to come back, and it touches on something John Gunnar was talking about, and that is maintaining existing infrastructure, which is, it seems to me, your priority right now. We all know the need for that, and the need to do that, but what is actually being done in that area?
So, I think, John, your point about value capture is very important, and it's something that we're using to try to fund some of our new investments. And I think that it is an area, from an innovative standpoint, that we need to be looking at. On the maintenance side, what we have done in the both at the state level and what states are trying to do across the United States is to say, what is the condition and performance that of our existing network, and then what is the investment level that is needed in order to maintain that condition and performance. So when I was at the Federal Highway Administration, every couple of years they would put out the conditions and performance report, and it tells you both your existing condition of your pavements and your bridges, which are obviously the two critical needs on the highway side, and then it tells you if you invest X number of dollars, the graph goes like this if you're on the good side, and if you're decapitalizing, then you're going down like this. But I think that the challenge is from the funding side is I don't think that we've done a very good job of communicating the importance of transportation to the taxpayers. And part of that is our own fault for doing a good job of maintaining our system, with the exception of the bridge that collapsed in Minnesota. There haven't been a lot of examples of spectacular transportation failures that really focus public attention. And unless public attention is focused, there's never a need that is generated. And so our challenge is, and I think that the thing that we have to start talking about is, our gas tax was raised in the United States in 1993, I believe, the last time it was raised. Thank you for recording this. I'm very stressed about making sure I say the right thing. In 1993, well, at that time, gas was probably about $1 a gallon, right? Well, now gas is $3.50 a gallon. The gas tax is the same. Cars are much more efficient, so people are purchasing less of it, but we're still delivering on this transportation system, and we've not had the frank conversation with the taxpayers to say, if you want this, you must pay more. Or maybe we are having that conversation and only transportation people are listening and people don't want to pay more. But then we have to start saying, okay, well, this is what you're not going to do. So we've been very yes and in transportation. Yes, we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do that. And I think it now has to become a question of, if you want this at this investment level, then you can't have these things, or you're going to have more of a federal participation. States are going to have to do more. Localities are going to have to do more. And the last point I'll make on this is I think that we do a very poor job in the United States of pricing, congestion pricing. Like I said before, the transportation system works great a lot of the time, but if it's not priced and everybody gets on the system at the same time, the whole system breaks down. So we're going to have to do things like hot lanes, the high occupancy toll lanes that have dynamic pricing that charge you more, depending on the level at that time. If people want to drive on the road without paying more, we'll have facilities for that. But if you want to be on there when there's great demand, just like anything else in this world, if there's a lot of demand, you should be paying more for it.
Okay.
Maintenance. It's a very huge part of our budget that we are spending every year for maintenance. It's roughly 50-50. In the road, it's 45 maintenance and 55 new project, and in railways the other way around. It's 55 for maintenance and 45 for new project. And last year we had to reduce the costs in our infra fund, and our minister said, well, first we put aside the budget that we have that we need for the maintenance, and we're not going to cut costs there. So we put that budget aside, and we really need it for the maintenance. For way and for railway. And then we're going to look at our new projects that we have planned, and we will see how we find a way for cost reduction there. And I believe it was very brave, because it's not very sexy for a minister to say, well, we keep our budget for maintenance, and yeah, there will be no more projects for new investment. So, but it was a good choice, because it's very important that you have enough budget for maintenance in order to avoid the bridge you had in the United States. So that's one point. And the second point I want to make, that in previous year we had a very high focus on just the investment that we did, and we didn't look at the life cycle cost of the investment. And that has changed now in the recent years. We're now looking more at the integrated cost of the life cycle, so not just the investment but also the maintenance cost that will come after that. And when we make contracts with private parties, we try to make an integrated deal. They make the investment, but they also take care of the maintenance in the years that come after. And the good thing is that they're going to think on another way about the investment, because it might be a good trade-off to invest more money and have a higher quality investment, because your maintenance costs in the years after will be at a lower level, and after all you have a better deal. So to make this integrated cost price, we think it's a very good approach.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I'll come to you in a sec. Vice Minister, let's hear your thoughts on this.
I would like to add several comments. In China, we have different situations from US and Holland. As a developing country, China has spent a lot of time to put our focus on the establishment of a new infrastructure. And in 2009, we have begun to impose fuel oil tax. And these funds are mainly used for the maintenance of infrastructure. And now in our real practice, the investment on the maintenance of the infrastructure has already equal to the construction of them. And if the fund for the maintenance of infrastructure is not guaranteed, we cannot ensure a sustainable development of transport.
Chris, come on in.
I'd like to carry on a little bit about the congestion charging that Shailen brought up. I think if one looks at the example of London, I believe the money raised by the congestion charge on vehicles, some of it or most of it went to public transport, and that was helpful for getting popular support, is what I've been told. But the principle of one form of vehicle subsidizing or paying for another mode of transport, you could also apply it to the funding of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. If air pollution in a city is problematic, then perhaps polluting vehicles pay a charge, and that money generated could be used to help pay for the infrastructure to support electric vehicle charging, as an example.
I want to ask the two and I think you know this question's coming, government representatives. Given what we've heard from the Vice Minister, the Chinese Ministry of Transport, with 50 years of infrastructure behind you and looking at China's huge build-out ahead, what would you have done differently?
I think that there in the 1950s, so I can't speak to what went on at that time. I think that there was a real, I mean, it's a very big question you just asked, but there's cultural implications. There's the whole symbolism of what the car meant at that time. But there was a real sense that a car meant freedom, and so we're going to build all of these freeways out to subdivisions so you could go out, and we were very successful at doing that. And so we've created, in some ways, we've built the infrastructure and now have community planning and communities that are laid out based on that model. I think that if you could go back retrospectively, we would have said, okay, well, let's provide for alternatives. Let's make sure that all of these subdivisions that we're building have connections so that you can get out, so that if we want to do bus rapid transit, We can do it efficiently, but now to get out of a typical subdivision, I've got to walk 20 minutes, then I've got to wait 20 minutes, and when I get downtown to the bus hub, it's another 20 minutes to catch my transfer, and so it's just easier to get in my car and go. And I think that is really really the way that if you could go back and do something differently, we made it so easy for people to have cars and to have all of this mobility that now our system is designed and built that way. And so what we're seeing is where communities now that are being very successful are the ones, and I highlight places like Minneapolis or Portland, Oregon, Chicago. But what we're seeing is this concept of livability, where people now are changing their perception of what quality of life is. They don't necessarily want to have to get out and drive. They want to be able to walk to places, to be able to do things, to use more of the Dutch model of being able to bike within places. We're investing in complete streets to make that happen. We're investing in public transportation to give people options just so they don't have to always be locked into driving somewhere. But it's very tough once you've already got a system that's built that way.
Yeah. Perhaps a slightly unfair question, but I want to hear what you have to say about that too, Leadery.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think we didn't do such a bad job in the last couple of decennia. But I would join Charlene in what we could do better, and what we could have been doing better in the past is looking at a more integrated way of how our transport system's working. At the end, all the traveler wants is a good door-to-door connection. And if we look more integrated, not only how it is by car or how it is by railway or how it is by bus, no, we should look at an integrated concept and help the traveler to go from door to door in the best way and in a sustainable way. And, well, to look more from the total perspective, there we could win.
I'd also like to hear the Vice Minister's response to those comments and add, again, perhaps unfairly, what do you learn from the successes and failures of other nations who have had 50-year-old plus infrastructures?
Thank you very much. The development of China's road is also a process of learning from the success and the failures of other countries. Many people may, including the Chinese people, may ask a question that whether China needs so much expressive ways, because this may cost a lot of money and materials. And secondly, whether this mode of transport is green or economic. I think to answer this question may be from the perspective of the population of China, because China has a very large population and a very vast area. The focus of our coverage is the cities with over 200,000 people. As I know, in the United States, they cover the cities with 50,000 people. They are not on the same scale because for a larger population, we have to provide very convenient transportation. Why? In China, we need 6 million kilometers length of road. In rural areas of China, there are 680,000 districts. And under these districts, there are also over 200 natural villages. Maybe in the Western countries, there are no concepts of the natural villages. In China, one natural village has a population of 100 people. For these natural villages, we have to access them with rural roads. This is a very basic service. Without this basic service, the Chinese government cannot
face the Chinese people. So that's the difference between our countries, because the huge difference between the East and the Western countries. And also in the eastern part of China, the situations in the city are relatively similar to the Western countries. So we face the same issues as the developed countries, as well as some issues that are not faced by the developed countries. Therefore, in the Western areas of the China, we are developing the mass public transportation system. As you may know that in the past in China, we have the the Ministry of Railroad, and we also have the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and also we have the Ministry of Road and the Ministry of Waterway. And in 2008 and in this year, we finished the reconstructing of China's system. That is, we combined the above mentioned 4 modes of transportation and integrate them into the Ministry of Transport. I think the main purpose of this restructuring is to take a holistic approach to the development of a transportation system. In the past, we may focus on one particular mode of transport, for example, the public transportation. But now, we have to strengthen the connection between the different modes of transport. For example, in some key corridors, the high-speed expressways, high-speed railways is developing rapidly. We are planning a couple of high-speed railways, and we're also developing the intercity railways, and this may be preferred than the traditional highway speed road. Therefore, currently in China, we are developing a lot of railroads to solve the problem of congestion. And take Beijing, for example. We have 6 million automotive in Beijing, and it is also equipped with 6 million kilometers of subway. We are planning to establish 10 million kilometers of subway. We hope that this will solve the congestion of traveling of the citizens. During the process, the new technologies and the new energies are also considered. As I have said that during this process, we are also adjusting our policies and plans based on the developing trend. The most critical issue that we are facing is the environmental problem. As you may know that the air pollution in Beijing is very serious. This may due to the way that citizens are traveling around, because a lot of people drive their cars and they emit a lot of waste gases, and also there are many factories, the chemical factories. So we are in the process of solving these problems. We pay a lot of attention, and we're very interested in the success and the failures of the developed countries, which may help us and benefits a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say that we have the same issue in the United States, and that we still have a lot of Americans that live in rural areas as well. And that's our challenge, is that we've got this built infrastructure, and there is a struggle in the United States, or competing interests between investing in the new technologies, the high-speed rail, some of the things that are for more urban populations, while still serving those populations that have chosen to continue to live in rural America. And how we address that issue as we go forward is going to be a challenge.
Okay. John Gunnar, let's have a quick word from you, and then I want to open it up to the audience.
Certainly, because in our country, we don't even have enough people to fill each car in Beijing. So the The traffic situation and the transportation situation and challenges are remarkably different from not just country to country, but also within countries. One statistics I tend to quote is that for every person killed in road accidents in Norway, 16 moose are killed. It sounds like a barbaric Viking ritual, but it's really just the statistical deaths of moose outnumber traffic deaths per population by 16 to 1. It means that there are traffic challenges which we have to face and for which there's no payment possible other than government payments. And I think that that's the situation we will run into in any country which has both a rural and an urban population, that we can talk about models which are well suited to urban areas where people also tend to be better paid and have higher wages than other places. But there are significant transportation issues outside, and the diverse nature of all countries make it necessary to have multiple solutions to how you finance these issues.
Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to throw it out to the audience and take some questions. We've got a few minutes, so just raise your hand and tell us who you are and where you're from. Any questions out there? Yeah, gentleman in the front here. If you just wait for the microphone.
Hello, my name is Maurice Gerards and I work, as you do, in the semiconductor domain. I'm very interested about what you sketch about autonomous driving, about cars that make own decisions 2 inches between each other, and about that future that we see. But what steps could we together set, governments and private sector, in the next 5 to 7 years to have the first step set on that chicken and egg situation? Because cars communicate with cars if other cars can communicate with each other. Infrastructure can help, because if the infrastructure can communicate to only one car, that only one car can benefit. But I would interesting to hear in your views on that.
Yeah, you want to say it?
So I often talk about this. My dad, when I was a kid, I wanted a car so I could drive to school because all the cool kids had a car. And my dad used to tell me, you know, when I was a kid, I had to walk back and forth to school, uphill both ways, right? And I think that when my child is coming to me, he will say, you know, I want to do whatever, and I'll say, you know, I had to drive myself to school, because I don't think that, you know, and I think that my wife is pregnant right now, so we're looking at about 16 years from now, I would assume, so 16 years from now, when my child is coming to me, I don't think my child will be driving to school, because we have graduated driver's licensing anyway. But even at that point, I just think that the cars will be driving themselves. It has huge implications. At University of Michigan right now, in Ann Arbor, they have a study with these vehicle-to-vehicle issues. And I just think that it's Chris had mentioned that people will have more productivity if their car are driving themselves. Our challenge in the U.S. is that people are having more productivity, but their car isn't driving themselves, and they're not doing a good job of driving it either. And so there's some safety implications. The vast majority of accidents or crashes are caused by drivers. And so from a safety perspective, but the challenges are many. And I'll let Chris talk about this a little bit, but I will say that our responsibility as government is to provide an environment and funding, so that if as this technology comes about, so charging stations and the sensors in the roads that will allow vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure, we need to provide the infrastructure and the funding to create that.
Chris.
Yeah, many of you may have seen, vehicles driving.
你们大家都可能可以看到，就是很多车都可以无人驾驶了。许多的开发商呢，他们也在开发这样的车。这是一个非常，它能够允许车到车之间的交流，以及车和基础设施之间的交流。将这个技术以及将那个传感技术和这个交通技术结合起来呢，我想。 这对于智能的交通系统是一个未来的一个前景。作为一个人呢，我们将感受以及交通性结合起来。当你在开车的时候， 你和同其他的司机进行协商交流，这就是一种沟通交流正在进行当中。这对于我们未来的无人驾驶可能会是一个好的一个方式。大家是否？
谢谢，我还有另外一个问题。
Thank you very much. My name is Eva Molnar. I represent the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, more precisely the Inland Transport Committee. One of its working parties is Working Party 29 that deals with vehicle regulations. I have a question to you, but before I raise the question, I would like to say a word, because I think we can have an expectation towards governments to accelerate the change towards new technologies. I personally believe technology is coming. Autonomous driving will be coming. But the regulators are a bit slow understanding the implications and lifting the bottlenecks. So the plea is, please ensure that if your government has not been participating yet in the discussion,
但是呢，无人驾驶这个市场呢，政府的这个管理还没有完全的进入进来，因此呢，在我们考虑这个无人驾驶未来的时候，必须要考虑到政府的这个参与，它的这个管理的参与。关于这个动态的这个道路的充电，可能的是我们可以对于高流量和低流量进行补偿。对于一些具有稳定收入的一些车，如何呢进行特许权转让，从而能够让那个政府呢仅仅停留在一些补助方面。
So I'll give an example. Well, there's a couple of things there. Yes, I agree on the regulator side. We need to help facilitate this. I guess that is the challenge with PPPs. So in a smaller state like Delaware in the U.S., we don't have. Now we have I-95, which is the artery for the East Coast that runs along through. But for the most part, in much of rural America, they don't have the traffic. And our challenge in the U.S. is we have different levels, right? But there was an attempt by Pennsylvania a few years ago to toll essentially one of their interstates, and they were going to use it to help fund public transportation. The challenge is it's not one entity that can make that decision. There's federal law that comes in, there's state level, and there are local jurisdictions. And so I don't know if I have a good answer for you, other than it's very difficult to transfer tolls and revenue generated off of one road and spread it out to other regions, because the users of that road will say, if I'm paying here, why are you taking that revenue and spending it elsewhere? John had
Yeah, John.
I think also that it's important to note that whereas we can look at alternate sources of transportation finance, it is, I think, a necessity of transportation that not all of it can pay for itself. Sometimes the investment is so new, or it's leading out to a city which hasn't been built yet, so that the market solution is impossible. And if we look historically at it, transportation has been subsidized throughout the centuries. It's been built for strategic reasons, for welfare reasons, for 100 different reasons than pure financial reasons and economic gain. There are, however, ways in which you can influence also, for instance, the local planning, which makes a communication project more or less commercially viable. And I do think that perhaps sometimes the federal or state levels, when meeting municipalities, are not stringent enough. We have examples in my own country where larger municipalities, or what would be the equivalent of the federal or state level, are spending money on building transportation systems, like, for instance, a new stretch of railroad. And they put a station at a specific spot where a municipality has regulated it to be a spot there. And the municipality has decided that they want to build villas with fairly large gardens, which means that the number of passengers at that particular spot will be very low. it'll be uneconomical to stop there, and you will not get the environmental advantages you'd expect from putting a railway where there previously was a road. And in such instances, I think the ones doing the building and spending the money on transportation will probably have to also have some regulatory capacity, or at least a carrot, if not just a stick, in order to make local regulations fit with the larger needs of the larger society.
Okay, thank you, John. Does anyone else want to say anything on the regulator point? We heard what Shailin said. I mean, you agree with what the lady has said in terms of the regulators being the bottleneck. Any other comments on regulators? Vice Minister.
I'd like to express my views in the following ways. First of all, with regard to the transport infrastructure, there is a general guideline, in my opinion, for the very utmost important infrastructure. It has a nature of non-profit. In this regard, I think the government should have a very sufficient and necessary fund to support the construction, because it is a very important tool to guarantee the nature of non-profit. And I think this problem is not that serious in developed countries, because in China, we have secured a successful experience with regard to promote the development of infrastructure without putting too much investment from the public. But we also have lessons to learn. That is, that we have already imposed too much tax or toll, which has raised a lot of burden for the public. So, and the public may have objections with regard to a relative high tax. Secondly, from the perspective views of developed countries, to support a large-scale infrastructure construction, there is no possibility to be dependent on public funds only. I've discussed with U.S. colleagues previously, and I also found that they also encounter the same difficulties. So, come back to the topic we are discussing today. We should encourage more private investment to come into the infrastructure. But in my view, there should be a concession mode for this private involvement, because only in this way can we reduce the cost and also help to reduce the burden from the public. So the two conditions I've mentioned should be well balanced to adjust our different focuses, taking into consideration of different developments we are encountering. So on one hand, we should attract as much as possible of the public investment to come into the infrastructure, and to guarantee that they can have reasonable profits. And on the other hand, we have to live up to the expectations of the public. And I know it is a very difficult issue of common concern to balance the two respects. And but we have to find a solution.
Please. Anyone else with a question? Yeah, gentleman at the back there.
Kevin Main from the European Cyclists Federation. Much of the discussion has been about using the funding models to fund infrastructure. I'm not sure I've actually heard It said that in many ways what we have currently is in more of a kind of market failure, where charging and user charging are actually mechanisms for behaviour change, and that we are, we've done it sporadically with fuel taxation and sporadically in very small levels and very unpopularly in many countries with kind of congestion charging. But in the long run, financial mechanisms are one of the few things we have left to force behaviour change effectively on a reluctant public. I'm going to suggest towards bicycles, but away from carbon-fueled cars above all else. And to what extent do the panel believe that ultimately governments are going to be forced to use charging as a behaviour change instrument rather than an investment instrument?
Go ahead.
We had a long discussion about the introduction of road pricing, and we had a system totally developed in the former government. And I believe it was a fair system. It was not paying for to have a car, but it was a system for using the car. And per kilometer that you were driving, you should pay a price, and if you would drive in rush hours, you should pay a higher price. But it got stuck politically, because at the end of the day, the politicians don't want to take the responsibility for introducing this system, because they were very afraid of how the people would judge it, and that they would judge it in a negative way. And it was especially also in line with privacy arguments, because when you want to follow how many kilometers had been driven, maybe you should also could see the government, Big Brother, watching you, where you have been driving and when you have been driving there, and this led to a big debate, and finally, we weren't able to introduce the system, and now our new government has said we won't discuss this user charge system anymore. So, well, maybe we have to wait to a new political situation here.
Okay, thank you very much, John Gunnar.
Of course, again, I come from a country which has a tradition of relatively high taxes on many things, including cars. And our solution, in order to have people drive electric cars, which are not particularly suitable to a Norwegian climate, has been quite successful. We buy a large percentage of the electric cars that are sold in Europe because we have removed the tax on electric vehicles. We've also given them the opportunity to drive in the collective lanes on the highways. So there are not only sticks you can apply, but you can apply some carrots too. And it'll take time for this to change, but positive efforts may also help.
Thank you, John Gunnar. Let's take another question. I've got time for one, maybe two more questions. Is there anyone else with a question? No? Last chance? All right. I'm going to give each of the panelists a good 30 seconds, I think, to leave you, the audience, with their message, what they want you to take away. I've done this with my other panels over the last couple of days, and it seems to have worked quite well. Just before I do, perhaps again, Sharon, this is a little bit unfair of me, but I don't know how many of you were in the panel yesterday with Mr. Sen and John Micklethwaite, and the event that was moderated in the main hall. John Micklethwaite from The Economist said some, I think, quite negative things about the US transport infrastructure system. Was he too negative? Was he unfair?
I mean, the fundamental American right is freedom of speech, and so he can say what he wants to say. I'm an avid reader of The Economist, so I don't want to have them cancel my subscription. So I don't want to get into too much trouble. Look, I think that it's at the end of the day, it's very easy to criticize. It's very hard to come up with solutions that can get passed. And I think that the challenge for many of us who are in these positions is that we have political responsibilities. I am an appointed official by a governor who is elected. When I was at the federal level, I was appointed by a president, and so we can propose a lot of solutions, and we can talk about the fact that we need to make more investments. And I can say things like we should use pricing to discourage or encourage different types of behavior. And if we come out with too much of a plan that's a little too radioactive or extreme, you'll have a new Secretary of Transportation up here the next time because I won't be in my job. And so it's, to me, really, I don't want to dwell too much on his comments.
Sure.
I just think that at the end of the day, we're doing the best that we can. I think that we have a great transportation system in the United States. We move millions of passengers in cars, on rail, public transit, freight, which is something we've not really talked about. We've got a great freight infrastructure. And so while we have some challenges, I think that the future is bright, and we're pretty happy.
Okay. You're a good sport. Thank you for that. And that can count for your last 30 seconds, if you like. Yeah. Vice Minister, let me give you just really 30 seconds to a minute to give your final thoughts to our audience to take away with tonight.
A 30 seconds is really very short. After so much discussion, I really have a lot of inspirations. And my U.S. colleague also have a very positive view on the U.S. transport system, and which enlightens me a lot. And I have a very great confidence in China's transport system. And we have those procedures, and we also have a lot of successors. Thank you.
Eternal optimist. Well, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that we have definitely solutions going forward to address all of the challenges associated with personal mobility, which I define as energy, environment, safety, congestion, parking, affordability, and accessibility. I think we have the technological tools to solve all of these problems while still preserving the freedom to move. The challenge will be in finding an appropriate funding mechanism to finance this, and I'm confident that with the social and the consumer benefits of vehicles that can drive themselves and are fun to drive and are connected, that we can find the consumer value proposition as well as the social benefits and find a way to quantify those benefits.
Thank you. Vida.
And there is a saying that forecasting is very difficult, and especially when it's concerning the future. Bearing that saying in mind, that my message would be that we, especially from the government side, we should develop a strategy that is adaptive, so that we can, if there are new insights coming about new technologies or new developments, that we can take it into our plans, and that we have an adaptive strategy to adjust our plans to the new insights. And that would be, I believe, very important.
Thank you very much. John Gunnar?
What we're talking about is investing and creating transportation infrastructures that create value. And we have to keep in mind that the transportation infrastructure that we have today already creates immense value. And private financing can be used for various not very advanced solutions, and it can be used for some advanced solutions. But tackling the projections, the uncertainties, and the risk about future development is a policy issue. It can only be solved by active input from politicians. It has to be on a government level that you try to set up the parameters for how to solve it, because it's also the governments that will have to face up to the voters if they're not solved. We can talk about where the money will come from. Private sector money is there, but solutions and risk management has to be handled by governments.
Very quickly, Shannon.
I just want to say that I go to a lot of these conferences, and we always talk about how we don't have enough money and we need more money. And I think that it's all of our responsibility to do a better job of messaging. We've got to communicate to the people out there, this is the value we provide, this is the return on investment when you invest in your transportation system, and that way they can give the political people the message from the bottom up, so it's not just us coming and saying, do this because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I want to thank all of the panel for their thoughts and their insight. I think it's made for a very interesting discussion and put a lot of pointers and points out there for us to take away. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to all of you for coming so late on a Thursday evening. Thanks very much.